Welcome to Artificial Terror, the home of spine-tingling horror stories that will keep you up at night. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, and leave a comment below to let us know what you think.
It was a dark and stormy night, and Emma was driving home from a late shift at work. As she drove down the winding country road, she noticed a figure walking on the side of the road. She slowed down to get a better look, and her heart raced as she realized it was a young girl, no more than 10 years old, drenched from the pouring rain and shivering in the cold. Emma pulled over and rolled down her window to ask if the girl needed help. The girl looked up at her with empty, soulless eyes and spoke in a monotone voice, "Can I come in your car?" Feeling uneasy but also sympathetic, Emma unlocked the door and the girl climbed in. As Emma resumed driving, the girl's clothes began to drip water onto the car's upholstery, and Emma could smell the stench of decay emanating from the girl. Trying to shake off her growing terror, Emma asked the girl where she lived. The girl replied with a simple, "I don't know." As they drove on, Emma's headlights illuminated a sign indicating they were approaching an old cemetery. Suddenly, the girl turned to Emma and whispered, "This is where I belong." Emma gasped as the girl disappeared from her car, and she slammed on the brakes. She got out to search for the girl, but she was nowhere to be found. In the eerie silence, Emma heard a faint whispering voice saying, "You let me in. Now I'll never leave." Emma quickly got back into her car and sped away, knowing she had just encountered a vengeful spirit. From that night on, she was never the same, haunted by the ghostly whispers and the feeling of being watched, always fearing the return of the ghostly girl who she had let into her car.
It was a dark and stormy night, and Emma was driving home from a late shift at work. As she drove down the winding country road, she noticed a figure walking on the side of the road. She slowed down to get a better look, and her heart raced as she realized it was a young girl, no more than 10 years old, drenched from the pouring rain and shivering in the cold. Emma pulled over and rolled down her window to ask if the girl needed help. The girl looked up at her with empty, soulless eyes and spoke in a monotone voice, "Can I come in your car?" Feeling uneasy but also sympathetic, Emma unlocked the door and the girl climbed in. As Emma resumed driving, the girl's clothes began to drip water onto the car's upholstery, and Emma could smell the stench of decay emanating from the girl. Trying to shake off her growing terror, Emma asked the girl where she lived. The girl replied with a simple, "I don't know." As they drove on, Emma's headlights illuminated a sign indicating they were approaching an old cemetery. Suddenly, the girl turned to Emma and whispered, "This is where I belong." Emma gasped as the girl disappeared from her car, and she slammed on the brakes. She got out to search for the girl, but she was nowhere to be found. In the eerie silence, Emma heard a faint whispering voice saying, "You let me in. Now I'll never leave." Emma quickly got back into her car and sped away, knowing she had just encountered a vengeful spirit. From that night on, she was never the same, haunted by the ghostly whispers and the feeling of being watched, always fearing the return of the ghostly girl who she had let into her car. A young boy and his family were set to have new beginnings and bought a new home in London, England. Besides, it was the perfect time for the boy to make new friends in the neighborhood. As soon as the young boy moved into his new home, he felt a strange presence in his bedroom. At first, he brushed it off as mere imagination. But as days passed, he began to see glimpses of a ghostly figure lurking in the shadows. Every night, the ghost would appear at the foot of his bed, staring at him with hollow eyes. The boy tried to scream, but his voice was muted, and his body was paralyzed. The ghostly figure didn't move or make a sound, but its presence alone was enough to terrify the young boy. He begged his parents to let him sleep in a different room, but they didn't believe him. One night, the ghostly figure approached the boy's bed and whispered in his ear, "I died in this room many years ago, and I won't rest until I have a new body to inhabit." The boy couldn't believe what he was hearing. The ghostly figure continued to haunt him every night, and he couldn't escape its grasp. Finally, the boy could take it no longer. He ran to his parents' room and told them everything. They listened to his story and finally agreed to let him sleep in a different room. But the ghostly figure continued to haunt the boy, even in his new room. It seemed that there was no escape from its malevolent presence. As the years went by, the boy grew up and moved out of the house. But he could never forget the ghostly figure that haunted him in his childhood bedroom. And even now, as an adult, he sometimes wakes up in the middle of the night, sweating and shaking, as if the ghostly presence is still with him. Eric was devastated when he found out that his girlfriend Bella had cheated on him. He loved her deeply, and the betrayal was too much to bear. He spent days in his room, crying and wallowing in his misery. But then, he remembered something. A few years ago, he had come across a book of dark magic in an old antique shop. He had never dared to use it, but now he was desperate. Eric began to study the book, practicing the spells and incantations until he felt confident enough to cast a powerful curse on Bella. He wanted her to suffer as he had suffered, to feel the pain of betrayal and heartbreak. But the curse didn't work as Eric had intended. Instead of hurting Bella, it seemed to unleash an evil force upon Eric himself. At first, Eric didn't notice anything strange. But as the days went by, he began to feel a darkness creeping over him. He would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, with the feeling that something was watching him. One day, as Eric was walking down the street, he saw a woman who looked exactly like Bella. He was confused and alarmed, but before he could approach her, she disappeared. The sightings of Bella continued, each time more frequent and more unsettling than the last. Eric became convinced that she was haunting him, seeking revenge for the curse he had cast upon her. But the truth was much more terrifying. The curse had backfired, and Eric had unwittingly opened a portal to the underworld. The spirit of an ancient demon had possessed him, using his body as a vessel to wreak havoc on the world. Eric soon realized the horrifying truth, but it was too late. The demon had taken control, and Eric was powerless to stop it. From that day on, Eric was a changed man. He was no longer the kind and gentle person he had once been. He was consumed by an insatiable hunger for power and destruction, and he would stop at nothing to satisfy it. And so, Eric's obsession with dark magic led him down a path of darkness and despair. He had thought he could use it to get revenge on his cheating girlfriend, but instead, he had unleashed an evil force upon the world that would haunt him for the rest of his days. Chris and Tegan had always been fascinated by abandoned places. They loved exploring old buildings, imagining what life had been like when they were still in use. So when they heard about an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town, they knew they had to check it out. The two friends drove out to the factory late at night, hoping to avoid any security guards or nosy neighbors. They parked their car a few blocks away and walked the rest of the way, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. As they approached the factory, they noticed something strange. There were candles burning in some of the windows, and they could hear the faint sound of chanting. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to investigate. They crept closer to the factory, trying to stay hidden in the shadows. What they saw next made their blood run cold. A group of people, dressed in black robes, were gathered in a circle. In the center of the circle was a young woman, bound and gagged, her eyes wide with fear. The cult members were performing some kind of ritual, chanting and swaying as they worked themselves up into a frenzy. Chris and Tegan were horrified, but they couldn't tear their eyes away. They watched as the cult leader drew a knife and approached the young woman. That's when they realized they had been spotted. One of the cult members had seen them and pointed them out to the others. Chris and Tegan turned and ran, their hearts pounding in their chests. But the cult members were fast and determined. They chased the two friends through the factory, their shouts and screams echoing off the walls. Chris and Tegan ran as fast as they could, dodging machinery and leaping over piles of debris. They could hear the cult members getting closer and closer, their footsteps pounding on the concrete floor. Finally, Chris and Tegan burst through a door and found themselves outside. They were relieved to be out of the factory, but their relief was short-lived. As they looked around, they realized they were in the middle of a deserted street. They had no idea where they were or how to get back to their car. The cult members were still chasing them, their black robes billowing in the wind. Chris and Tegan were exhausted, but they knew they had to keep running. They ran for what felt like hours, their legs aching and their lungs burning. But eventually, they couldn't run anymore. They collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. The cult members closed in, their knives glinting in the moonlight. Chris and Tegan knew they were done for. But then, everything went black. When Chris and Tegan woke up, they were lying on the ground in the middle of the abandoned factory. They had no memory of how they had gotten there or what had happened to the cult members. They stumbled to their feet and looked around. The factory was quiet and still, as if nothing had ever happened. Chris and Tegan didn't know what to make of it. Had it all been a hallucination? A nightmare? As they walked back to their car, They couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. They couldn't explain what had happened, but they knew that it was something they would never forget. Thanks for watching Artificial Terror. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more spine-tingling horror stories. And if you have a terrifying tale of your own, send it to us at our email address for a chance to have it read in our next video. Stay scared, and we'll see you in the next one.